Hey everybody, welcome back to Old World Legends. We're going to dive right into our deep dive on special rules. So Evan, where did we leave off?
So we just talked about strikes first, and now we're going to get into strikes last. Now, what's interesting about strikes last, and maybe confusing some people, is that the
Mm,
majority of the time, this is a special rule that is on a weapon, not on a model. And there's
yeah.
been a lot of FAQs about this, but strikes first and strikes last work differently when they are on your weapon than they are when you just have them innately. So, for example, a high elf noble has strikes first as the
hmm
special rule on his profile, and that means
hmm
that he's going to be initiative 10 in combat for his assailment spells, for example, not just his
hmm
regular attacks, because it just makes
hmm
your initiative 10 the second you get into combat or into the combat
Yep.
phase. Strikes Last, however, makes your initiative 1 as soon as you get into
Yep.
combat. However, the vast majority of the time, this is only on your weapons, so that means that it's not going to affect your assailant spell. So let's just say I had a great Bray Shaman, right, who's
hmm
using his Bray Staff as a great weapon, so it gives him Strikes Last. Cool. So he's
hmm
initiative 1 with his attacks only. He's not initiative 1 with
Yep.
his assailant spells. He uses his initiative statistic because Strikes Last, it only works on that weapon when it comes from your weapon, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it matters too, again, more so even with the FAQ drop, and we'll dive more into it later. But if you could switch from weapon from round to round, right, that special rule of striking last is only applicable when you're using that weapon. So that'd be another reason where this differentiation matters, right? If I wasn't using that weapon, then I'm not getting that special rule being applied to me. So there's a matter there. I think the place here where people get the most confused is that they think like, oh, I'm striking last, so I'm striking last. That's literally what the words say. It doesn't actually work that way. It just means you take whatever when you use this weapon, you take the initiative of the character and you reduce it to 1, but you're not actually necessarily at 1 in particular, such as when you're charging, because it's basically reduces your initiative to 1 you use your weapon, but then you add any other bonuses or modifiers to your initiative. Often, hey, I have a great weapon, takes me to strike last when I'm using this weapon. That's part of the weapon rule. So I'm initiative 1, but I charged. Hey, if I went 2 inches on the charge, then I get +2 to my initiative. If I went 3 inches on the charge, I get +3 to my initiative. So then in that case, my initiative would go from down to 1, whatever it was before, to boop, back up to 4 because of that +3 for charging. So I think that's where a lot of people get tripped up because it's literally called strike last, even though it's really strike at initiative 1 with this weapon is a more accurate descriptor.
Yeah, it's very similar to how move and shoot is actually march and shoot.
Yeah, so I get why they called it that way. It's easy reference point, but it can trip people up with the wording versus how mechanically it actually works. I
It's
do love that it
slightly,
actually works this way, though.
yeah, it's slightly less bad than what it used to be called. It used to be called Always Strikes Last, which would be even worse.
That's even more confusing. But this is a great rule. I love in this edition how they've mechanically made strike first and strike last work because there's more nuance, there's more depth, and there are things you can do to help to try to counteract these or still have nuances of. Again, it matters if I am a character that charged and I'm at initiative 4. If I'm fighting Evans and his initiative that's initiative 3 basic humans, right, I could still strike first versus, oh crap, if there's elves on the other side, they're initiative 4 or 5 depending on the unit, they're going to hit me first. So there is a lot of initiative matters a lot in this game, and I
Yeah.
love that they didn't just streamline it out because often with strike first or strike last mechanics we saw in other systems like in 40k effectively it kind of eliminated initiative from the game systems. Initiative is a very important stat. There's a lot of depth to it and nuance, and I'm very glad it's still important in the
Yeah,
game and how
and
they
in the
construct
exact
it.
same way that you're going to use toughness and strength of your attacks, using that kind of strength versus toughness math to figure out, can my unit of hammers take on that gigantic chaos spawn or not? Can they,
Yep.
right? And you use this strength versus toughness math to figure out whether they have really any kind of a shot to fight them. In the exact same way, you do initiative math to figure out whether my unit of sword masters of Hoeth can be charged by any of your units in the game without getting all mauled to death because of their initiative
Yep.
7. So initiative math is very important, and most of the time, okay, most people who need to be doing it constantly are elf players because they often have high initiative and they need to be higher than you in order to live because they are often they often have to kill you before you kill them, kind of thing.
All right,
So
moving on.
yeah, and so there one more thing is just that strikes last kind of doesn't matter if you're so tanky that you won't die to any of the attack coming your way and you're like, cool, I go after you, I don't care, and then you just hit them anyway.
Yep.
All right, so then we have stubborn, an amazing rule. Instead of taking a break chest the first time you lose combat, you just automatically fall back and go to it instead, which
hmm
is very, very important. So you can do this to get out of a situation where you're massively outnumbered and you would be on a
hmm
double one to not run away. You can use this to choose to fall back in good order when you don't want to give ground, for example, when you want to like pop through a unit and get kind of potentially get away, or to lead someone else kind of into a killing zone. I often use units of like Bestigor or Greatswords to like, sure, I'm gonna lose combat. I'm fine with that because I want to fall back, reform into a wider formation with more attacks back, and then the next turn I can countercharge you with some other units, right? So Stubborn gives you a really
Yeah.
reliable brick to use as an anvil. I think that Stubborn is one of my favorite rules on an anvil. It's possibly even better than Unbreakable in my mind.
It definitely has it, and the things I like about the way they've constructed it in this edition is two parts to it. The first part is the first time it's required to make a break test. So the reason why I like that, it's not just any time or the first time you choose. It's the first time they're required. So this creates a trigger point for your opponent to try and get it out of the unit, to trigger it the first time, right? That's why I like that, because that's not just a catch-all. I'll use it when I want to use it. The opponent can, all right, I'm going to put this unit here to try and get this to happen here, then because I want to, then the next turn or something else to combo with it, something else. So I like that it creates some agency in the opponent. So that's one reason why I really like the way this rule is constructed. The other half of why I really like the way this rule is constructed is you may, as everyone was just saying, you have
You
a
don't have to.
choice. I could choose to use it. I could choose not to use it. So it not only creates interesting agency for your opponent and them trying to play around it, because it's a very powerful rule, but it also creates interesting choice for you as a player in terms of when do you want to use it, because you don't have to use it. So I love that. This is a great rule. It creates interesting choices for both players. Fantastic.
And you can also tie this up with Shield Wall to combine it so that you can use Stubborn to automatically fall back, and then Shield Wall to give ground instead of falling back. With, like, for example, a unit of hammers, you charge them, and
Hmm.
no matter what, unless if they're all dead, they're going to back up 2 inches, and then you're just going to be no initiative bonus, and they get to start whacking you.
Yeah, and hopefully the dwarf player has you exactly where he wants you. All
If
right.
the hammers are in combat, they have you where they want.
Yeah, hammers are really good. Okay, stubborn. Stupidity. Let's go over that. And this did get a recent FAQ update. It is
Yeah.
worth mentioning. It
So
got
don't
worse.
read any of these words at all because it's very different now. But it's still you still take a test. So unless you're in combat, you make a stupidity test during this. It actually, they did change it. Unless you're in combat or fleeing. So if you are fleeing, you don't take a stupidity test. I don't think anyone was doing that. That
Nope.
would be awful. But yeah,
Yep.
so unless you're in combat or fleeing, you take the stupidity test. It's a leadership test. You
Hmm.
can use inspiring presence from your general or a character who joins the unit.
Yep.
And then
Yep.
if you fail this test, the FAQ dramatically changed this and says you cannot move. You only hold against charges and you can't cast spells. Your unit basically just does absolutely nothing for that whole turn.
Yep, it just sits there and drools, whoa, and does nothing else. So the reason why we're talking about it, and because again the FAQ 1.5 just dropped, and it is worth mentioning. Like as an example, before the first version of this, the penalties weren't that bad, and so when you, for instance, were rolling your Chaos Lord on the Chaos God, gifts table, and you rolled a 1 and he got stupidity, who cares? It rarely came into play with what he was doing. Now with the update, the failing stupidity is very punishing. So now, oh boy, you really want to pass that test, because if you don't, you're in a heap of trouble.
Yeah, and in the match play rules, there are many objectives that cannot be held by units that fail stupidity. So if you're able to use spells to give a unit stupidity, and then hopefully they just fail their leadership check, it could be a game-winning move, even if they have got a big brick of unit just sitting on an objective, they just can't hold it anymore. Um,
Yep.
so one interesting thing to point out here, though, is that if unit or mount that does not have the special rule becomes subject to it when it is joined or ridden by a character that does. So if you have a character that gets stupid and it is in the unit, the whole unit is stupid and the whole unit takes the test, which means
Yep.
unlike, let's say, a warrior priest prayer or any other kind of self leadership test, if you are stupid and you are in a unit that is veteran, the veterans let you re-roll the stupidity test, which I think is intentional. A
Yep.
great example of this is if you want to put your Bestigor, if you want to put your Beast Lord in a unit of Bestigor that he could take as his kind of bodyguard and give them the veteran
Mhm.
role, he can just kind of roll on the Gaze the Gods table willy nilly, and even if he gets stupid, the Vestigor let him re-roll that test because they all got the test. They all got stupid too, and the whole unit takes the
Yep.
test.
And this might be the best quote in the entire rule book: "Stupidity is contagious."
That's fantastic.
That makes me laugh every time I read that.
As a very recent Night Goblin player, Mike, you know, you should know
I didn't
this.
run into stupidity too bad with the Night Goblins. We were playing the Escalation League, but oh boy, when I had to make some panic tests. That did not go so well. Having to rally on leadership 5 was rough. Needless to say, that didn't work out in my favor. But anyway, that's another video for another time. Let's talk about Swift Stride. This is actually one of the newer rules for this edition, and honestly, one of the most powerful ones.
Well, it's new that it's a special rule, Mike. It used to just be an aspect of cavalry, monstrous cavalry, and stuff like that, where they would just say, hey, if you're this unit type, blanket, you whole unit type, you would get D6 inches on your charge, flee, and pursuit rolls, and every single unit of that type had it. Now, what they've done in this edition is they've made it a special rule, and this is a special rule that can then be given to units like, for example, Skaven have a banner that can give a unit Swift Stride, which is very, very good. Or it is a special rule that can then not be given to units of monstrous cavalry, like, for example, Dragon Ogres do not have it, or Chariots. A lot of Chariots don't have it. So they can kind of create a haves and have-not situation with this rule. Now, in the pre 1.5 FAQ way we were playing, Swift Stride was so overwhelmingly powerful that it was almost impossible to imagine putting that many points in a unit that did not have this rule, because of the charge threat that you needed to have, to be a combat unit without Swift Stride. You just barely ever got anywhere. I think the 1.5 has massively changed this, so that you can just sit there, shoot people, or just be very durable and say, I don't need to charge. If you charge me, I win. And that is a very interesting power dynamics shift. Now, they could have changed the rules and said, okay, Swift Stride's only a D3, or okay, all infantry gets to charge a little bit farther. They didn't do those things. Instead, what they just made it be that if you don't charge, you're just in a lot better position than you used to be, which was to be completely screwed.
Yeah, and I think that again, the biggest change is before the FAQ update that had cumulatively so many buffs to infantry that effectively anything that wasn't infantry, in particular the faster things, cavalry, monsters with Swift Stride, were just so powerful, they were just dominating. And Swift Stride meant it felt like they were dominating more because they could always pick and choose when they got the charge off versus the bricks. But now that the bricks are actually quite a bit of a threat, okay, now it feels pretty good that you would expect the cavalry or the flying monster to be able to move faster, but they have to think twice before they just rush into that infantry brick. But they have made some other updates to this. I think the biggest one that's not really clarified here in the core rulebook is that you have to declare, once you are going to, you're doing a charge, flee, or pursuit, before you roll the dice, you have to declare to your opponent, I am going to use Swift Stride or I am not going to use Swift Stride. That's the biggest thing that they added to the FAQs. That actually was even before the most recent 1.5 FAQ update.
Yeah, in particular, it was very lame to be like a unit of cavalry right next to the edge of the board, like let's say 8 inches from the edge, and saying, cool, I'll roll my 2 dice, see what I get, and if I roll a 1 and a 2, then I'll throw the Swift Stride dice in there as well. But otherwise, I'll just tick just the 2. And then that was so lame when you're playing dwarves and you're just trying to chase them down. You're like, really? Can you just hurry up?
Yeah, I think the main thing is, again, a lot of Warhammer: The Old World, a lot of the core, one of the fundamental core principles of this game is risk versus reward.
Yeah.
And that's not knowing what's going to happen. And you are making an interesting choice. Do I want to take more risk sometimes in rolling the dice? But there's more reward if it pays out, right? And so this is one of those where it was too advantageous to know the result of your dice first and then make a declaration. So they made it very clear, before you roll any dice, you have to declare whether you're going to use it or not.
Okay, so the next rule we have is terror. So when a model causes terror, they can trigger this kind of offensive leadership ability. So when a unit that causes terror declares a charge, the charge target has to take a leadership test, unless if they are immune to psychology, or if they cause fear.
When do they take that test?
They take it immediately. So before they even get to choose what to do, they do take the test immediately. And guess what? There's no limit to the number of terror tests you have to take. I've recently been writing ogre lists that every single unit champion buys the Demon Slayer scars, and the whole army causes terror. So if 3 units charge you, you had to take 3 terror checks. That just sounds kind of fun.
And this trips everybody up. They think they need to resolve the charge reactions first and so forth and so on. This is one of the exceptions in the book where it says immediately. There are others for other rules where it says immediately. So I say I have a terror causing unit. I'm declaring a charge. This is legal charge versus Evan's unit. You are not immune to terror. Therefore, before he makes any reaction, take a terror test. And if he flees from that, off he goes, right? And we never gets to do his charge reaction. So it's an immediate test. And I get to know whether he's going to flee from that terror test, and then I could decide if I want to redirect or not. So it's an immediate test. When it says immediate, there are a few versions of this in the book, not a ton of them. This is one of them. You do it immediately.
Yeah, and you can do this. You can multiple terror people, so that's fine. If
Very
they
cool.
fail, there is no reroll for a BSB or anything. If you're not veteran or immune to psychology, or if you don't cause fear or terror, and you just roll too high, you're just running away. That's it.
Well, it's almost like it was terrifying.
Yeah.
Yep.
So there are horror stories of people having 1,500 point army units of like warriors of chaos, where there's like 60 warriors of chaos with like 5 wizards stuck in there, and the whole brick
Yep.
just sits there flinging magic missiles until a single thing with terror charges it, and they have to roll an 8 or less, or they all run away.
You'd be surprised how often even you roll those 9, 10, 11 pluses. It happens on 2d6 more than you think.
Yeah. The second thing that happens is if the winning side of a combat includes 1 or more units with terror, then the enemy side has -1 to their leadership characteristic for the break test. Now, both of these effects only work if the enemy does not cause fear or terror, and if they are not immune to psychology, because the latest FAQ clarified that basically, if you're immune to psychology, you don't take the terror check, obviously, and if you're cause fear or terror, even if you just cause fear, for example, you downgrade terror to just fear, so you don't have these 2 penalties. These only work against people who don't cause either. So if a Chaos Dragon is fighting state troops and it wins combat, the state troops have -1 leadership for the break test.
Yep. Which is still the majority of the game is not immune to it. It's very applicable. You're fighting an undead opponent, not going to come up at all that entire game because their entire army will be immune to psychology.
Yeah, but they're bony, so.
And this is the other part to, as Evan just went over, to at least clarify that for people. People do get really confused by this. If my unit has terror and your unit has terror, then ignore the rules. Doesn't matter. Doesn't apply, right? It's irrelevant. Now, if my unit has terror and every unit has fear, then it downgrades my terror in my unit to causing not terror in his unit, but fear. This has always actually been like this in previous editions of this game. But it is confusing for new people who aren't used to it. It's actually, I can't think of another version of a rule that kind of downgrades it versus just nullifies it in this edition. There might be, and I'm just not thinking of it. But this is not a nullify. The nullify is terror versus terror. Downgrade is terror versus fear, right? So effectively, I would still cause fear in Evan's unit that causes fear if I cause terror, right? But if he causes fear, my terror unit doesn't care because terror is more powerful than fear. So imagine fear is a B tier spooky ability, and terror is an A tier spooky ability. So they are a downgrading system, is how that works.
And one more thing to point out is that if you have a unit champion who can buy an ability to give them terror, for example, the Cloak of Beards item for High Elves, it gives you the offensive bonus of the enemy unit has to take the terror check, and they have the -1 of their leadership characteristic. However, the unit you are in is not immune to terror and still suffers the -1 penalty and the terror checks on your end when you are charged by terror causer, because only the one model, not the entire unit, causes the terror. So that's another nuance. So if you buy a basically I cause terror now item on a unit champion or stick a character in a unit, it doesn't make them all immune to it. It just kind of gives you the positive offensive bonuses and not the defensive ones.
Yep. So some important nuances there. All right. One of my favorite rules, timber. Let's talk about that, Evan. One of your favorite rules too.
Oh man, I have such a terrible luck with people timbering on me. I had a game I was playing against Leo Skaven, right? Where I charge in, I kill his freaking the big crawly thing.
Yeah.
The Hell Pit Abomination, right?
Hell Pit Abomination.
Timber falls on me, does like 2 wounds to my BSB, and then
serves you right for killing it.
And then he rolls the 6 on the D6 and comes back to life after he timbered.
I love it. I love it. I love nothing more than the sweet revenge of someone kills you and so you fall on them and crush them to pieces. It's amazing. But how does timber work? Let's walk people through it.
So when a model with this gets reduced to 0 wounds in close combat, you do a roll off, and whoever rolls higher gets to pick which direction it falls in. And any units that are in base to base in that arc suffer the D6 hits at the strength of the model with AP1. So if it's like a giant and it's like strength 6, D6 strength 6 AP1 hits is a lot of hits, especially if it already did all of its attacks into you as well. it can
Mhm.
now just fall on you and then take insult to injury,
But
right?
melee only, not from shooting. That's an important
Yeah.
distinction. And then help people understand what if hey, we do a roll off and I roll a 3 and you roll a 3. What do we do then?
Well, you just roll again and again and again.
That's
You get
right. You
stuck
just
there
keep
forever.
rolling again until somebody wins the dice off. That's how it works. That's a core rule. That's not specific to Timber.
Yes.
That's what a roll off is in the core rules.
Yeah, and I
Mhm.
do that all the time with the deployment zone. We both roll the same number for 5 minutes, and then we're
Yep.
like,
Anyway, Timber's super fun. I love it. I do miss the old template of the giant falling over template, but this is faster and still fun.
yes. Okay, so we have Unbreakable. So if Unbreakable, as we alluded to before, if you lose round of combat, you don't take any break test whatsoever. You just give ground and
Yep.
get pushed backwards. That's it.
Very powerful. Very powerful.
Um,
Um,
there is a
yeah.
limitation that characters that aren't unbreakable can't join units that are, and vice versa. That barely
Mhm.
ever matters because
Pretty
units
rare.
like this often have rules that mean that no one can join them anyway. Like for example, flagellants, or slayers, for example, have the loner rule, so no one can join them unless they also have loner anyway. And the only models with
Yep.
loner have unbreakable. And then
Yep.
there are examples like flagellants where there's an exception to be made that the warrior priest of Sigmar can join them even though they're unbreakable and the priest aren't. And then when they
Yeah.
do, the priest gain unbreakable. So that's whatever.
You'll see this more on some big beasties, some big monsters will have it, and they can't be part of units or join units anyway. The most applicable thing is undead, as the whole army will be unbreakable, but they'll crumble the undead armies. So
And that's what
that's
the
where
next
you'll
rule
see it the
is.
most. Mhm.
So the next rule here is unstable. So the most common situation where this applies to is undead, but also to your demon prince there, Mike. And
No,
if
no,
the
not my demon prince.
if the unit with this special rule loses a round of combat, it loses one additional wound for every combat result point by which it lost. These wounds are
Yep.
lost after combat results have been calculated, but before break tests are made. If
Mhm.
I mean, if in theory you were unstable but not unbreakable, which is I don't think that's anybody has that. Um,
Well, you could be a multi-charge, right? There's
yeah,
theoretically you
different units
could
mixed together, right?
charge two different units, and one unit has unbreakable and the other unit doesn't. So that's where that could come into play.
Right. Um, if it contains any unstable characters, allocate wounds to the unit first before anyone else, and then they're divided equally between characters in the unit. So again,
Mhm.
this is how you generally get rid of necrosphinxes because you just try to say, "Aha! You only got 2 wounds on me, and now you just crumble to dust." So
Yeah, certainly again, especially with the new infantry rules where they have a lot more combat resolution. The Necro Sphinx has less combat resolution because it's not going to get its close order benefit anymore. Sometimes or the Green Knight, right? Sometimes the best way to defeat those things is not beating them or attacking them through and killing them that way, but through their unstable rule and having them crumble to pieces that way.
yes. So I mean, again, we're gonna have to have another video talking about all of the things the FAQ did kind of break, and one of the things it broke was can you use regeneration saves when you lose wounds from unstable? And
That is a different
no,
video for another time.
no, but okay.
Let's move on. We'll come back to that later.
Uh huh. We keep saying that. All right, Vanguard.
Mhm.
Vanguard is a rule that's great for kind of being a midway between scouts and ambush and all those things. So it helps you move up after deployments have been made and just move into combat. They're recently FAQ'd to be that you cannot charge after a Vanguard move, which was an absolute
Mhm.
cancerous thing that was happening.
Oh
However,
yeah.
one thing that's really cool about that is that I can Vanguard my Saber Tusk units, and then they can't take the Impetuous the first turn because they can't charge after Vanguarding. So that's
Mhm.
actually pretty cool for
Yep.
me.
Yeah, Vanguard's a great role. It's a great way to get a little additional movement, a great way to get closer to an objective, or to get some additional flanking going on before the other opponent starts moving. But again, the biggest update is you cannot charge. And again, it was pretty toxic when you were having very fast units of cavalry or other things that were vanguarding and go, "Oh, we started 24 inches away, but I'm still charging you turn one," and that was a whole bunch of not fun. So I'm glad they changed that.
Um, just to point out that you don't have to Vanguard forwards. You can use your Vanguard move to do a reform, for example.
You can.
It could
Hmm.
be any kind of maneuver, but except march. So you can do a wheel, you can do a pivot, you can do redress the ranks. So just keep in mind that if you have Vanguard, you can use that to, for example, like embed a little impetuous unit like behind one of your units, and then Vanguard them out from behind them, or something like that.
Hmm. You also may use Vanguard. You are not required to.
Yeah,
It
you're
is
not
an
required to.
option.
Okay, veteran. Super amazing rule. I absolutely love this rule because I play a lot of like elves and
It's like top five, maybe
humans.
top 10, maybe top five. It's really good.
Yes, you get to reroll any leadership test that's not a break test, but guess what? That's fine because you
Wow.
want to reroll. And because
Wow.
battle standards do not let you reroll every break test anymore, this is really big. You get to reroll your terror
Hmm.
checks, your fear checks, your panic checks, your banshee screams coming at you.
Banshee screams.
Yeah,
Yep. There's so many things. There's some spells require you to do
mind
this.
razor spell.
Um,
Yeah.
it's so powerful to be able to do this, and quite frankly, when you get some lists that have tons of veteran in they are, it just makes them almost immune to certain types of attacks or strategies on the
Yeah, looking
battlefield.
at
It's a
you,
very
Bretonian
powerful ability.
Exiles.
Hmm. But it's not break test. Very important to remember that.
It feels really cool when you have veteran. However, I will say there are a lot of elite units in the game that do not have this, and it does feel a little bit
True.
weird. Like why Dragon Princes don't have it, for example. Um, it
Well, because
and
they're
then
silly elves, obviously.
yeah, and not even Grail Knights have veteran. So there are some interesting situations where veteran has been handed out a bit asymmetrically. There are places where like veteran state troops have the veterans rule, but great swords do not. So there are
Yep.
some interesting weirdness that does come up. And it is a really
Yeah.
powerful rule when you have leadership tests that you need to take with things like, the Banner of the Crooked Moon or the Dark Moon or whatever it's called from Beastmen that gives you the Falconhorn type
Again, to
ability.
your point of it's like Swift Stride, right? Like if everybody just had it in this unit type, then right, the fact that everybody doesn't have it, like Swift Stride or Veteran, it allows more differentiation to exist between very similar elite units in different armies. So I'm glad that not everybody has it. Now, one could make the case this unit should or shouldn't have it. That's a different story. But I'm glad that not everybody has it. It allows it to be a differentiating factor and make your units feel different than other elite units.
Okay, so another really cool rule is volley fire. You get to
Hmm.
essentially have every rank beyond the ones that normally shoot. So usually just the first rank or two ranks on a hill. So all the other ranks,
Hmm.
you can have half the models rounding up can also fire. But you
Hmm.
can only do this if you haven't moved, and you cannot do this if you stand and shoot. So if you do like a Trap Mystical Pathways and you teleport your Tomb King skeleton somewhere, they can't volley fire
Hmm.
because that is moving. And if you're being
Yep.
charged by a dragon now, the new FAQ is you only get two ranks to fire, so you still only get two ranks to stand and shoot with. Um,
Hmm.
so basically, if you stay totally still, you can volley fire with half of all the ranks behind them, which, in the case of Tomb Kings is often like, like let's say 50 archers in one unit, which is really cool. I think that's great. But you do have to have
Hmm.
some kind of a sacrifice to get to do that.
Yeah, it's definitely a good rule. It's again that half rule makes it not so powerful, and all the caveats. I think the biggest thing is we don't see it as applicable or come into play as often this edition. It's just because ballistic skill shooting is not as effective in this edition as it has been in previous editions. But volley fire itself is a great rule to have.
Okay, so Warband is everywhere, and it is a very important rule for the armies that have it because, first of all, you get a positive modifier to its leadership equal to its rank bonus. Now, rank bonuses across
Huge.
the board are actually limited. Regular infantry can only get a rank bonus of +2 unless if they have Horde. Now,
Hmm.
very often units that have Warband also have Horde, but we're going to get into that. Um, and then, let's say cavalry, right? They can only ever get like a rank bonus of +1. So Warband can give you bonuses to leadership. However, that bonus cannot be used for restraint tests or, as per the latest FAQ, for impetuous tests. So if you're
Hmm.
impetuous and you have Warband, you still have potentially like leadership 6, right? If you're kind of like lower down on the totem pole, right? Um,
Hmm.
then the secondary effect, which I think is overwhelmingly good, I mean, honestly, better than the first effect in many cases, is if the
Hmm.
majority of the models in the unit have the Warband rule, you can reroll the charge rolls. I
That's
wish this
great.
was on something else like Impetuous or something. Like it's just, or maybe just have it be its own thing. It's so crazy that this is on Warband.
Yeah, or again, to your point, maybe it could be applied to something else. But either still, Warband is a very powerful rule. It gives you two benefits, not just one benefit. Again, I do like the nuance, the depth, is that it's the benefit to your leadership is your rank modifier. So the number of ranks you have, in terms of do I want to take a bigger unit with more ranks, and what type of unit? Is it infantry? Is it cavalry? Is it heavy infantry? It matters in terms of your rank bonus and how those apply. So I love the nuance and depth in terms of how am I crafting not just my army, how am I crafting these individual units, and how much of a benefit can they get from this rule. So again, I love how they crafted that.
Okay, and just to point out also, there's an FAQ about how Warband leadership with Inspiring Presence works. Basically, you add the bonus, you add all bonuses, of Warband after you pick the leadership value. So if you have a character in the unit that has Warband, like let's say you have an Orc War Boss with leadership 8,
Hmm.
and he's in a unit of
Hmm.
Orcs, well,
Yep.
his leadership can be modified by Warband because he has the rule. So his 8 can go up to +2 more to 10 from the ranks of Orcs in his own unit, and that makes
Hmm.
his leadership 10 for his inspiring
Hmm.
presence to nearby friendly units. Or you can use the leadership of your general. Let's say the orc is actually on a chariot, and so his leadership of 8 is being used by a unit of orcs who are nearby, and they can use his unit of leadership 8 and then add their warband bonus to it to get back up to
Hmm.
10 because that unit still has ranks of guys. You can do it either and or both ways. In fact, you can even have a unit of orcs that gives the orc warboss, let's say, only +1 because there's only one rank of orcs, that's leadership 9, and then they can then be using that leadership 9 by a unit of that has warband with, like, let's say goblins, and they have 3 ranks, and then they cap out at 10. So they use 9 plus 3 and then it equals 10, right?
Yep, very
You
true. But they also clarified in the FAQ that the negatives
Yes.
also get applied as well. So it's not just the positive, because a lot of people were playing this role of, well, my inspiring presence, my character with this warband is leadership 10, and even though my unit who's taking the leadership test has all these penalties from spells
For
or
example,
spooky
-1
things or
from
whatever.
terror. That's a good example
Yep.
of a penalty.
Or a lot of necromancer spells had a lot of minus to the penalties, and they're like, well, I'm just going to override it with my inspiring presence. So again, really good clarifications that the bonuses, the benefits do stack, but also the negatives do stack as well. So all of these do get applied to that formula. It is not just ever just truly override something and ignore the rules. So good FAQ updates.
Right, and if you want to know how to beat units that have warband, stick them in terrain where they don't get their rank bonus anymore, unless they're open order. That is a really good way to do
Everybody
it.
forgets if you are in terrain, you do not get your rank bonus.
Yes.
Everybody forgets that.
And
Very
it's only
powerful
like
rule.
if it's like 25% of your units in difficult ground and you're not open order, you don't get your rank bonus. It doesn't take very much. And guess what? There's the Tempest spell, which creates a big bubble of difficult ground. Every single vortex in the
Hmm.
game can be difficult or dangerous ground and then disrupt units' ranks. Or you can have the new primal magic has a thing that's very similar to Tempest, where it creates a big bubble of difficult ground. So
All right, that's Warband. Very good rule. And Warp Spawn. Is this our last
it's
special
the
rule?
last
Did we get
special
to the end?
rule, and it's the special rule that
Ooh.
applies to one model in the core rules, just the Demon Prince. That's it. And it also applies to every single.
Uh, yeah, Galrock doesn't have it, does he? No.
No, it's only a Demon Prince from the core rulebook. And from the main factions.
No.
The only other
Yeah.
things that have it are the Demons of Chaos and the Demons of Chaos Legacy Army, and the only demons that have regen saves are Nurgle. So it's literally just the Demon Prince and then Nurgle demons.
Hmm. All right. So what does it do?
Well, it's just strictly a negative. If you have that
Mm.
special rule, you can't make a regen save against wounds caused by magical attacks, and you can't
Okay.
join units that have it, or vice versa. It's also a rule that is used as like a label signifier for certain special abilities and weapons that are kind of like anti-demon in how they
Hmm.
work.
Hmm. Yeah, and this is definitely a holdover from previous editions. And again, in previous editions, they very much there were a lot of things that there were a lot less magic weapons in previous editions, significantly less for the rank and file units. It was typically only characters. So when you had undead units that were ethereal, like suddenly they're very, very powerful because they couldn't be damaged or hurt because so few units had magic items. That carried, so that's a legacy from holdover from other editions. In those other earlier editions too, it was also often that again there were far less magic weapons. So this whole theme of demons would lose their saves or defense mechanics when someone brought a magic weapon felt fine and fair and balanced to a degree in previous editions. So this really is bringing that older rule set or themes that they had from older editions into the newer editions. So that's why you see that here. Now, for the Demon Prince, or a lot of people still play it this way, but we definitely in our Old World Legends errata update and other communities have said, hey, if people are playing a demon army, this just feels awful because so many units have access to magic weapons now to just constantly never get your ward save. Because remember, the demon army, the legacy army, has very little actual armor. And only Nurgle, for the most part, has regen. So a lot of the errata
Yeah.
FAQs, and so check the community you're playing with. Are they using the Old World Legends errata update or a different community's update? Often they will say, no, they still, even though they're warp spawned, we're still going to let them keep their ward save and regen save because it's a whole bucket of not fun to lose those
Yeah,
if they're
the
playing their
Nurgle
main
demons
army.
in particular are very expensive, and their whole thing they're trying to do is be survivable, but they're not, because if you just have ensorcelled hand weapon, you just walk up and smack a plague bear in the face who have low weapon skill, and then they don't get their ward save or their regen save if you play rules as
Yeah.
Games Workshop wrote. And when it's a
But the
14 point per
thing,
model guy who just keels over at that point, and then he also crumbles his unit because they didn't survive the damage, it's like
yep.
quadruple terrible.
But the thing that will actually come into play significantly more often is you will run into many Chaos players out there because Warriors of Chaos are just awesome. And Demon Princes are super cool. As the second part of this role, we're saying, hey, he has the Warp Spawn tagged. It means he can't join other units that don't have the Warp Spawn. So this is a big, meaningful nerf to not embed your very expensive Demon Prince inside a brick of Warriors of Chaos or other units that typically a character would be able to join. So that is very applicable, even to the core factions. That will happen quite often because Demon Princes, we see them a lot because they're really cool and really powerful.
Absolutely.
Cool. All right. So we did to the end. We got to the end of the. Took us 4 different videos to get through the special rules. There were a whole bunch in our beginning series, onboarding players, and hopefully the veterans learned from someone as well. We will continue this. Well, I don't know what the next topic is in our beginning series, but we'll go from there. Evan, any last thoughts, sir?
Well, the next topic is going to be all the different formations you can do and all the different reasons why it gets crazy. Like, for example, the open order in terrain. So we'll talk about that next time.
Okay. We'll see y'all later. Bye.